to the Renegade Context Podcast. My name is Sue Hamilton, and on this podcast I will be talking to performers from all different backgrounds. I'm currently doing a lot of stand-up, so my first guests are pulled from the stand-up pool of Belfast, as it were. Some of them have different experiences in their backgrounds. Some of them have concentrated purely on comedy. And so it's great to get these different perspectives on what performance is to them, why it's useful, why it's helpful. And I just love listening to the stories that people have to tell me about their experiences. So in this first episode, I am talking to Paul Mone. Paul Mone runs BelfastImprov. And as you can imagine, he is an improv performer from Belfast who also does stand-up. And we talked about what it's like starting out. We talked a lot about improv, of course. We talked about the bravery it takes to get up on stage for the first time. And there's plenty of little anecdotes along the way as well. So without further ado, my first guest, Paul Mone. I hope you enjoy. So, welcome. Hi.
Hello.
How's it going?
Good.
So I wanted to talk about mostly like performance and I guess what it means to people and why people get into it. So what's your background?
What's
How
my
did you-
background?
yeah.
Straight into the background.
Yeah.
Why not? So my performance was, so I only started performing when I was in my mid-30s.
So that's pretty late to the game.
That is definitely late to the game.
Like I thought I was late to the game. I was 20, 21 when I kind of...
And that's late to the game.
Well, it is when you're surrounded by circus people who've been doing it since they were 5.
Yeah.
No bastards.
Yeah, no, fair enough.
Yeah.
I think most comedian stand-ups are probably in like the mid-20s
Yeah.
to mid-30s range whenever they
When they start having
mid-twenties.
their crisis.
Yeah. I mean, they've had the
Whatever
crisis
it is.
well before that, but then they're like, God, I can do something about this crisis. Let everyone else know
Make
about
it funny.
it.
So mid-30s.
Mid-30s, I was probably 33 or 34. I think some early mid-30s. 40, I'm almost 42 now. So yes, something like 8 years. Yeah, so I got into performing improv first. So I took improv classes, not in order to perform, but just for the crack.
Yeah.
So I had no dreams or aspirations of being on stage. Past the dreams and aspirations of most kids wanting to be celebrity actor or whatever when you're young.
With no work or consequences.
Oh yeah, just you're spotted somewhere and they're like, I want you to be on this.
You're
huge
amazing.
Everybody
loves
this
you.
Natural talent. So, you have those fantasies. But outside of that, I had no dream of actually setting foot on stage. And never really done it. So when I took improv classes, that was my first true experience of being in front of an audience of people who were there.
So why did you decide to do it in the first place? Was it like a public speaking thing, or because I know some people get into it through that route?
Oh, not at all. I had absolutely no desire to do anything even like that. I was quite happy in my little world. I got, and it's so funny to think about it now because I teach this stuff, but I got wrangled into it by someone else. So I'm not only am I late to the game, I didn't even want to be in the game.
Wow, you were coerced into the game.
I was coerced into the game.
Wow.
By a friend of mine, friend and co-worker and improviser, who for years was saying, you should give this a go. You have loads of fun at it. I think you'd really get a big kick out of it. And I was just like, I don't know. No. I don't know. /no.
I I was also like, improv is kind of one of those things where you feel like out of all of the performance styles, that's the one where you're gonna have the most embarrassment. You know, like, because it's real sort of on the toes stuff. Like, it's not, there's no script, there's no prep, there's just...
Yeah, you can feel the most out on a limb, certainly, when you're doing it.
Yeah.
The thing is, I never even viewed it as something that I couldn't do, because I didn't view it as a thing that people did.
Yeah.
So I would, you watch, and I'd been watching live improv shows at this point, and not for a second had I pictured myself doing it, whether it would be bad or good. I just hadn't that concept of a normal person being on stage. And the people I saw on stage were naturals. I was like, these people are just born into this.
Yeah. Yeah. And nobody ever works at it. It just happens.
It just happens.
Yeah.
Some people, that's what they do.
Yeah.
Whereas, any other like thing in life where you see someone doing it, you're like, oh, I could have a go at that. That's a normal human thing to do. Like running around the park, you're like, I should be running around the park. I could do that. I wouldn't be very good at it, but I could do it. But this was just like, didn't even have like like wasn't able to conceive of it. So even when I was coerced into a workshop and enjoyed it, and then of my own volition took classes just for the crack, even then I wasn't like, I'm going to do this on stage in front of people and I'm going to be like them. I was just like, I'm just doing it for the laugh.
Yeah.
So that when I first got on stage and did it, I was like, this is mad. This is totally mad.
Yeah.
I am one of these performing people
one
now.
Of the naturals.
Yeah. and with none of that baggage of like imagining myself going to be there, just like it just like appeared as a performer, which is, I think, a very peculiar and unique experience, or so I thought. But I think that the majority of people who do something like improv don't see themselves being on stage. I think it's different when you do other types of performing art, because you do imagine, like, you do conceive of yourself as being in front of an audience. But like,
I think with acting, there's a script, so you can see the process as well. You can kind of go, oh, if somebody gives me a script and I learn these words, I could do that. Whereas improv, like, I think it's a personality based thing, really. Like, like, unless you understand performance, you don't really see where it comes from or how it works, or that there is some kind of structure behind it, that there's like a learning process.
Yeah.
And I think comedy's another one of those as well. Like, people say that all the time, oh, I could never get up there and do that, and street shows as well. I think there's a sort of like mystical notions surrounding certain types of performance, but I think everyone thinks they could be an actor.
Yeah. You see it everywhere. I mean, you like it's. Yeah. I think that's how it's different from a lot of the other forms, is that, it's like street performance is something that you see it, but you don't see it every day around you. You don't see magazines.
Yeah, no.
About it, and like
you have to be living the life to kind of
or like be always in city centres.
Yes.
A lot of time in the city centre looking at performers.
Yeah, we're all the weirdos hanging out. But yeah, I don't see a lot of improv. I mean, like, I don't leave my house very often, which, if I'm going to be honest. But like, it's not something, even if you go to like Edinburgh, the Edinburgh Fringe, there's a lot of different types of shows, and improv would be the smaller number, I think. Do you think that's because of the amount of people who want to get involved in it, or is it the audiences it draws, or...
It's still an incredibly niche form. I think it's the most niche form, and because there isn't the traditional route taken to get into it, and because it doesn't necessarily attract, I mean, all of these things are connected, but it doesn't necessarily attract performers per se.
Right.
It's mostly like really amateur people get into it that just kind of want to have a bit of fun. Is that it remains kind of like a niche form for niche audiences. That's not always going to be the case, and it's not the case if you go to Chicago or somewhere.
Sure.
Or like Toronto or whatever. But it's
still like the mecca of improv.
Like Chicago for sure.
Chicago.
In the US. Yeah. But there's like huge improv theaters all over the world that are like, giant. They have shows every night and different types of performance every night, and they're always sold out. And you visit these places and you're like, my God, this is such an incredible improv scene, and like just it's one of those things, because here, I think people only know whose line is it anyway.
Yes, that was such a good show.
It was a really good show.
Yeah, and they were good comedians as well. Like
They were
really
great
on
performers.
ball every night. Like
they were having a real blast.
Yeah.
But because it's like we only really see this, and even like I'm performing it now, but like, you know, for 25 odd years or 30 years or whatever, that was the only thing I really knew, and there were no live improv performances here in the north, really, even in Ireland. Or there were, but they're so very small that you would never have heard of them or seen them.
I think it's kind of looked down upon. Like, if you ever see it, and like, whoever writes for comedy shows in America really fucking hates improv.
Oh
yeah. It's like anytime you see it, it's like all these dickheads doing their little improv.
Yeah. No, absolutely, and that scene exists. As an improviser, I have to say that scene definitely still exists. No, you're totally right. And I guess I hadn't had. It was almost like a blessing, because I hadn't really had the exposure to bad improv.
Yeah.
That whenever I started doing it, and was just very lucky to be around very competent people who were doing it, and in very competent shows, is that the first time I think I actually saw like a really terrible improv show, I was like, what are these people doing? They're ruining the name of improv. And then even then when I started seeing it crop up in TV and movies, like the people making fun of it, I was like, what shows are these people watching that are so terrible all of the time? But then you realize that in again, places where it is very popular and it is slightly more mainstream, and again, I've talked about places like Chicago, where there's a lot more of it, a lot more people are getting into it, a lot more people are watching it. It draws much bigger crowds to it, and so therefore you have a greater chance of people doing it who are really, not that they're not good, they're not performance ready per se. They get a big kick out of doing it and having fun with each other, which is maybe the most important thing. But it is the most important thing. It's not.
I agree with you. I don't know why I found that so funny.
But it is. It's definitely true. It's more important that people get something out of it for themselves, and it's not necessarily for performance. I mean, clowning's not unlike that. It's a performance art, but it's also something that you yourself have to feel like, I'm getting something out of this. This is for me as well as for the people that are watching it.
I certainly think what people think clowning is versus what clowning actually is are two very different things. I imagine that's very much what improv is. Like, people go, oh, well, improv is just you give me a few words and I'll make up a story, and there's got to be so many more layers to it than that. Clowning is the same. Clowning is like, put on a silly costume and I pull out some scarves from my pocket and whereas genuine clowns go to school for like 10 years and do some really weird emotional stuff to themselves. It's not something I ever want to get into, having seen them. And there's some clowns and fools who live their life like that. That's just who they are now. They have become the character. There's a guy called Jolly Goodfellow. That's his legal name. No, sorry, his legal name is Robin Goodfellow. I've seen his passport. And he talks like this. He's from Australia, crikey. And that's all the time. You'll never hear him talk in any other way. If you see him as a person, he is the character. And then he does 24-hour shows. It's insane. It's 24 hours of nonsense.
Yeah.
I mean, you could walk into anything at any time, you know. He's broken the world record. I think he's broken his own record a few times, and then people just stopped saying yes to him. Yeah. They were just like, okay, I don't know if this is safe anymore. You gotta stop. But yeah, so I suppose the public perspective of what something is versus what something actually is can differ very much.
Yeah, I mean, it's a huge overlapping, it's a big vein of like things, including newness, audience size, level of professionalism, or not professionalism, but like the extent to which people in the art form think of it as a professional art form or something that they want to take really seriously. And I think even with stand-up, people who have been doing it for a certain amount of time, they take it so seriously that it is part of them.
Yeah.
That they can't imagine themselves not doing it, assuming that they have a basic level of competence. And even
Yeah.
when they don't,
Yeah.
they still continue to do it.
Have you heard about the 4 levels of competency, or the 4 levels of mastery?
Yes.
That's one I live by. And I like to think of myself as consciously incompetent as opposed to unconsciously incompetent. And if I've gotten to that level, I feel like, it's better than the other. It's better than not knowing what you don't know.
Yes.
Yeah.
No, absolutely.
But conscious competence is definitely where you want to end up there. I've seen a lot of people who are they're not great at what they do, but they're totally unaware that they're not great at what they do. And I think sometimes that's okay, because if you do something often enough, you'll get good anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's some people who just don't seem to learn, and I don't know what it is about those people. Like, you just kind of know that they're never gonna get good.
Mm-hmm.
No one in this scene, nobody in, like, I'll say that now in case anyone's watching this thinking I'm like throwing shade at people.
List of names of people we were going to shame.
Yeah.
Gosh.
Shit, you show me the list after.
Just one name. Hate that guy.
I heard he killed a man.
There was one person in the audience and he hated it. That's like, I think folks are mostly like quite competent.
A lot of them seem to come through, like a lot of people I've spoken to have come through your improv into the stand-up scene.
It's a really good way, I think, to get into the other, because it's aimed first off at people who don't really want to perform, which is the best type of performer. The best type of performer,
it's like that
hands
power
down.
thing. Whoever's seeking power shouldn't have it.
Exactly. The best type of performers are those that don't see themselves as performers.
Yeah.
And then when they get into it, they're like, oh. And then they sort of make... once they get into like the other performing arts, they make it more human, more normal.
Yes.
They're normal people within the performing arts.
They're just extending their own personality into it. Like,
So,
as opposed to the egotists who like, well, I suppose not everybody who wants to be a performer is an egotist, but there are certainly certain characters who you just like, oh, you will do anything to be famous. You will just do. I know a guy who he said that he was going to do, he's a very good circus performer, absolute arsehole, but he's a very good circus performer, and he said he was going to do one of those Thingy's Got Talent or whatever, it was an Irish version of one. And I was like, but you don't like doing gigs at all? And he goes, no. And I went, why are you doing it? And he goes, well, one of these producers is going to see me and think, that guy can make me money. And I was like, this is not the 1930s. Like, variety is not a thing anymore.
I'm gonna get spotted.
There's no like P.T. Barnums, like, loading up jugglers and freaks to go on a tour with. And I said, you won't be anywhere near any producers. You'll be near the ADs and the assistants and the helpers. And he goes, well, what do I get out of it? I went, you'll get a good show reel. What'll I do with that? You'll get gigs. I don't want to do gigs. Dude. There's definitely sort of a lack of reality for some people. Like, I suppose, like you were saying, when that idea you have when you're a kid of like, oh, I'll just be walking down the street and someone will point at me and go, you're amazing. You're going to be the next big whoever you think you are in your head. But I think most people grow out of that and get a little...
Yeah, I don't know.
Someday.
Necessarily. I mean, I still have it.
Yeah.
I still have that.
But you're aware there's work that comes with it as well.
Well, no, I'm aware in conscious day-to-day life that I'm never being spotted by anyone.
Yeah.
Penniless and unknown. But...
a true artist.
But in the dreamy moments from like, sitting at home having a cup of tea, I'm like, someday.
Yeah.
Someday they'll realise.
It'll all come together. Yeah, for sure.
I don't, just when you say about not liking shows, I mean, I don't like doing shows. I love doing improv shows. I would do it every night if I could. I love the performance of it. I'm good at it. I'm competent without having to think about it. We've just been doing it for so long.
Yeah.
But, so I would do that every night. Stand up, on the other hand, I am still new. I'm competent, but I'm not nowhere near maybe even the middle of the stand-up of people who are performing here. But have done quite a bit. But I just don't like doing small gigs. minutes. I don't like doing like 5 to 10 minute slots.
Yeah.
As an improv performer, I like to like really like flesh things out and like play for like 30 minutes.
What I found as well is because most of the spots I've been getting are 7 minutes, and what I do is I get up and I just talk and I see what comes into my head and I hope it's funny. And I found that even when I was getting the longer minutes, my brain had just cut me off at 7 minutes every time. I was doing a hypnotherapy course, and I had to do a 5-minute presentation, and it 7 minutes. It was like everything is 7 minutes now. It's like it's not easy to adjust once it's rammed itself in there. But yeah, no, it's weird. Like the very short, because for me, like a street show is 30 minutes is a short street show, and that's what I did. Like just sort of keep it tight, less talking, more juggling, get people to shout occasionally. Big trick, hats. You know,
specifically, is that just a generic thing that people shout? Yeah. Big trick, hats. Or
the generic thing they shout out is throw it higher, which is just fucking weird. It's not the hardest trick to throw it higher. It's just not, okay? Just did some really complicated shit there that went right over your head. 30 minutes is a short show. Like 40 minutes is the average.
Yeah.
You get some arrogant fuckers that go for an hour. But like all the spots in Edinburgh would be a 40-minute show.
Yeah.
So like they liked me because it meant that they got on 10 minutes earlier after me. So yeah, that's kind of what I was used to. So getting up for 5 minutes or 7 minutes it's odd. You know, you got to cram a load and you can't, there's not enough time to work on the material in front of your audience. I did go to that writing group, which is great. It's really lovely. Lovely atmosphere, really welcoming. But you are reading to performers. That's not your target audience. And it's a problem I had with circus people as well, is they would always do circus shows and they would do the galas for the juggling conventions. And then they wonder why it didn't work for a regular audience. And it's like, because you're not performing for a regular audience when you're practicing. That's you gotta sort of tailor to, they're not gonna clap for your 7 balls. They don't care. What they want to see is 3 done really well. You know? Which is great because 7's really hard.
Yeah, I can imagine. Throw them higher.
Throw them higher. Yeah, they just want to see 1 thrown really fucking high. That's all they want.
Yeah, I'm not. So, for writing groups, for comedy writing groups, see, I have a different view on it. But because you're not, it's not in front of like an audience per se. That's not the greatest. But you get things out of a stand-up comedy writing group that you can't ever really fully get in front of an audience. And that is people who are going to be absolutely alert, again, depending on their confidence, absolutely alert to the subtleties of your performance. Right. And that's the bit that you need to work on. It's not whether or not you can get the yucks at the end. Because
it's the rhythm and the pace.
That whenever I was part of writing groups and when I was running stand-up class, I wasn't really even concerned whether or not somebody's joke would work. It was whether or not it was the performance of it. It was what was their eye contact like, you know, what were their facial expressions like, what were the pauses like, and like just what the specific wording. Sometimes I'm like, that word's an excellent word. Yeah. And it's something that when I'm watching stand up is I'm not even fully aware. I'm just laughing. I'm like, what am I laughing at here? Something that is not obvious is happening, and I'm just like laughing. It's like when you're watching a really great clown show, and you're like the person's just like staring at you, or like they have something about their physicality, the way they just moved or messed up is incredibly funny in a way which is like you cannot. Like you almost need other performers around to say this is what they've done. This is the technique that they've used.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which is why those groups are like really, really helpful, I think, for the performers in like the core performance. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Or maybe I'm just full of myself.
Maybe you're talking absolute shit.
I mean, I teach this stuff, so like that's always going to be my perspective. Well, really, the core of the performer. It's all about what you want out of it. Never think of the audience.
But no, that is true, because I do feel like, you know, an audience isn't going to know about rhythm or pace or anything like that. And somebody was asking about, in the last group, they were kind of going, well, what's the deal with the rule of three? And like I think the answer from most people was, oh, it's a general rule, and once you learn it, you can kind of break it, which, you know, is good advice. I think you should all learn all rules before you break them, figure out why they're there in the first place. But I suppose if I hadn't been there, I wouldn't have been thinking about that for the next week. It would have been, what is the purpose of the rule of three? Like, what is the point? And I was thinking maybe it's just in terms of just the rhythm in itself, like da 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 thing, da 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 thing, da 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 punchline.
Yeah. Because
just da 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 thing, da 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 punchline, it doesn't feel long enough. So I was thinking maybe the rule of three is actually just that's the minimum. You can just, if you can keep that going, and when you see a comedian add in another thing, and then add in another thing, and then add in, and you're like, there's no way I could still find this funny. They've said like 20 things at this stage, you know. And I suppose a lot of that has to do with the words they use and the concepts they're playing with and stuff as well. But I suppose had I not been at that group, I wouldn't have spent a week thinking about one thing, you know, that specific thing. I would have thought about some other random thing for a week, like. But yeah, so that, I suppose that's very interesting.
So when you do stand up, you go in more or less unprepared.
I go in with a bunch of stories in my head. I'll throw out one or two of them. I'll see what kind of audience I have, and then I'll pick the rest based on that. If I'm on form. If I'm not on form, it's a fucking disaster. But that's I think that's the street show background. Yeah. Because for street shows, you just talk, and you find it doesn't matter what you're saying as long as you keep talking, because like all the work's done for me when I go to do a stand-up bit. Like the crowd has been gathered. Everyone wants to be there. If they don't want to be there, they can leave. That's fine. They've paid money, so they've already invested in whatever's happening. They've decided they want to laugh, or they wouldn't have gone to a comedy show in the first place. And usually they have a drink in their hand and they're in good form. Whereas on the street, your audience, they want to be somewhere. They have somewhere to go. They have something to buy. They want to get home. They have kids with them. You know, like they have a purpose, and you're interrupting that purpose and saying, hey, come stand here and watch me do absolutely nothing while I gather a crowd for the next 15 minutes. And I found that all you really need to do is keep talking, and people will stay. And you tend to kind of like pull the, it's like what you were saying, you never quite know why you're laughing sometimes. Like a really good comedian, you're like, I don't think I even heard the words. I was just sort of wrapped up in that rhythm. And I think it's the same thing with street shows, is you're just sort of connecting with people to the point where they almost feel obligated. I've seen, there's a guy, I won't name him in case any of my street friends see this, but they'll know exactly who I'm talking about. There's a guy, and he's known for holding his audience hostage. And throughout the entire show, I watched his show once. Like, he's world class, he's very, very good. I watched his show once, and everyone's constantly clapping, and they're exhausted, and they actually want to leave, and you can see it in them. They don't want to clap
like
anymore.
Walking around backwards trying to find the exit while they're clapping.
But somehow they've invested themselves into the show. He's got them to invest, and now they can't leave. There's a weird psychology to it. So I feel like when you get up on a stage, like automatically you're on a stage, you're higher, you've got status. You can take a breath, you can slow down. You can't really slow down with the street. I mean, you can, but you have to be really, really, really good. Yeah. And I'm not. I'm just not that good. So like getting up on stage, it feels a lot easier after you've convinced complete strangers to stop whatever they're doing to watch you do nothing for 10 minutes. Yeah, you're like anything like that. I mean, it's the same, I think, probably with improv, is that once you've been out there with nothing. Yeah. I say it with nothing. I mean, obviously there are structures in improv and mindsets, I guess, that allow you to be able to do that and not worry so much about it. So you're never really out there with nothing. You always have like ideas of things to do. But going from there to stand up, yeah, that's why you find more people now in stand up having come from things like improv or other types of performing art, because it's not easier,
but you have a lot of the core skills already reinforced. Like you're starting off at a level of like basic competency rather than having to do 10 gigs before you realize what it's all about.
The first night I did was one of Luke McGibbon's new performers nights. That was the first stand-up night I did, and I watched those guys, and it was like literally their first time on stage, and I remembered that feeling. And I think you don't have that if you've already done your improv, or you've done theatre, or you've done something. That abject fear of being in front of complete strangers at least is sort of at a sort of manageable level. And just to watch these poor people up there for the first time, and nothing but respect for anyone who gets up on stage for the first time. It's absolutely terrifying.
Of course.
No need to be terrifying, but there's something in our genes that like you do not want to draw the attention of a bunch of strangers. Might get murdered. Yeah. Maybe.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Fade into the background. Wear the same t-shirt as the curtain. Do your research before you go on. Arrive on stage dressed as a mic stand and hope that nobody spots you until you start talking. It is too nerve-wracking, and you have to memorize because newbies aren't improvising, or they shouldn't be. Sometimes they are, but they're trying to memorize their jokes, their punchlines, the order of things, and that's I think what scares them is they realize that they've never maybe held a microphone before and they didn't think it was going to be as heavy and awkward as it is. The lights are blinding them. They're like, I can't see anybody.
Yes.
When I did my show in the.
I do like them to turn the lights down if that's the case though, because I like to be able to see the audience.
And whenever it's improv, I like both. Whenever it's stand up.
Fuck it.
I was gonna say I don't, but you know what? I do like to be able to see people. But I also love performing in a room of like total darkness. Okay. When I did my first solo show, I did the second and third times I did it in the black box, and so I did it at Accidental Theatre, and it was just a wonderful experience. And then I did it at the black box. So I packed out the big room with the black box for the show. That's very
nice space.
It's a great space.
Yeah.
And whenever, and like, you know, I'd been doing stand-up for a while, and I'd done the hour, and it turned out an hour and 5 or 10 minutes, and it went off almost perfectly, almost without a hitch. A few things that I needed to work on, but otherwise exactly the way I wanted it. And so coming into the second show, I was just like, this is going to be total breeze, and this lovely big
cometh
space
before the fall.
And this is I just hadn't thought about what the room was going to look or sound like, and I'd seen things there before, and I'd actually been on stage there before as part of other people's shows. But I got up and I grabbed the mic and I looked out, and the lights were so searingly bright that I could see the capillaries at the back of my eyes.
Oh,
you know, like if you're at the dentist,
like when you
the
do
doctors
that,
and someone does that, and you see the back of your eye. I could see that, and I was just like, it was just totally caught me off guard. Of course, I'm launching.
That's like Clockwork Orange experience, really, isn't it?
Yeah, I couldn't close my eyes. They were just like the widest open you can imagine. There may as well have been clamps on them. And that's the experience, I think, of a lot of people. I mean, not that exact experience, but in that moment, I'm trying to do. In that moment, I'm trying to do two things. Number one, remember the basic physical performance and moving around and words that are in my set, because when I do stand up, everything is written to like absolute key, like even the pauses are written in, and do that, but at the same time try to like balance myself again, knowing that I can and when I blink my eyes, it's the same thing. I'm just like, I blink them and I open them again, and I get this like, I can see the backs of my eyes. And you know, my eyes adjusted eventually, but it really did throw me off the first 7 minutes of my set, and I started going through it faster, and I lost my pacing a little bit. Anyway, so to be doing it brand new, and to not have bright lights and a microphone, and to not have to remember your set, and I think people who've been in this for longer and stand up and they've had a couple of gigs, and they look at newcomers and they're like, yeah, it is tough. they forget exactly how tough it is your first time, and all of the things that are going through your head and the environment. So hats off to anyone who can complete a set.
You do forget how abjectly terrifying it was just to stand up in front of people. And even people people are like, oh, this is a safe space. You're like, there's nothing safe about it for the first time,
I mean, I love bright lights and darkness. Like I
quite like to be able to see how people are reacting. I want to see if they're moving. I think that's just like, I don't know if I was better at writing scripts and if I was better at sort of learning that side of it more, that maybe I wouldn't need to see them. Maybe I wouldn't and then I wouldn't need to change my mind about what I'm doing halfway through doing it. But that might be just because I got so used to, because I started out doing circus, like with props. And when you have a prop, it's easy because you're just doing, they're not really looking at you, they're looking at the object you're playing with. And then after that I did theatre, and I was absolutely terrified to speak on stage for the first time. And then when I got on stage, so when you're doing circus, you're engaging the audience nearly constantly. Like you can see anytime you go to a circus, they're always like, big hand movements and like, watch me. So when you're doing theatre, the minute I walked on stage, I was like, oh, I just pretend they're not there. So much easier. Again, you're back into engaging the audience as a comedian. What was my point? What did I start? I can't remember what I was
saying.
Bright lights. And so, I mean, if it's, so I suppose when you are scripting things, and it is a script, like if it's a sketch, I don't care if I can see them or not. I don't care if it's a camera in front of me or if it's people, because you're working on something that's completely structured and completely acting based. But I do think of stand-up a lot more like circus in the way it engages the audience. And so I do like to see how they're reacting. And I think just because when I was doing street shows, with street shows, they take you off the stage and they put you at eye level with everyone, which again is pretty scary because now you can see the whites of people's eyes. But once you get used to that, you kind of like seeing that. And also it means you can call out people if they're doing something funny, if they're doing something interesting, or, like Luke had a really great set there. I don't know where I saw it, but somebody had said their dad was dead, and he just went with it for about 5 minutes, talking about dead dads. And talking about specifically their dead dad. Turns out it was okay. It was a while ago, so they hadn't just come into the show. It's a really shit day. I need some comedy. And I think you can do that if you can see people. But I suppose if it's really heavily scripted, if I was good enough at that, I'm starting to work on that a little bit more. The actual scripting of the work instead of just relying on whatever I'm feeling like that day, essentially.
It's, different strokes for different folks, as they say. There's just obviously lots of different ways to do. There is no one way of doing stand-up. Everyone has a different approach, and in fact probably 3 or 4 of the most popular comedians, certainly in the north, although they're all the same in one way, they all have different approaches to how they do it. And as you go more into the bigger group of stand-ups, who some of them come from performing backgrounds, some of them don't, some of them are very young, some of them are not, and everyone has a different way of doing it, and it's just about trying to make that their own. And I have to know to the letter exactly what I'm doing at any time, and that's sort of improv is different. I'm making that up, but I'm still trying to let on that I know exactly what I'm doing. But
it's probably a lot easier to script something once you've done the improv, because the more you do your improv, and you get a longer set as well, you're not just up there for 5 minutes, as you're saying, you get to actually play with it. You probably have a better idea of how audiences react than, say, the average stand-up comic.
Yes, because you're saying things on the hoof, or you're moving around on the hoof, and then you hear people laughing, and you're like, that was funny. That movement, something about that movement is very interesting. I didn't even have to say anything. It was a great lesson. I did a show a couple of Sundays ago, and it was a phenomenal show. And so part of what I do is I'll do like a 2-person show for, anywhere between 15 and 40 minutes. Obviously without a script. And it's just always such a fantastic time. And I did this one show, it was about 17 minutes, me and the partner. And for almost the entirety of the thing, I barely spoke. And not out of intention at the beginning. Yeah. It's just the other person I was on stage with was just, she was like not talking over me. It was like really great. I encourage people talking over each other. But she was like, to make the point, I can't remember, my sister or wife or something, she was just like, I don't think, she's giving off at me for some reason. And so I was just like naturally like quiet. And then I was like, this is really funny that I haven't been able to say a word. I'm going to continue trying to speak and not being able to speak. I think that will work. So I'm aware that premise is funny. At the same time, we're in the middle of it. She's still talking to me, but people are laughing. And I start doing facial expressions as if to say, like, I really want to try and speak. Without making it so obvious that people know that I'm trying to do it. I'm trying to make it look so subtle that people think, it looks like it's natural. Yeah. And people just start laughing. And they're laughing at this barrage of words and this, like, these physical, like, slightly very subtle physical changes. And we just played almost the entire show out like that. So that type of awareness, I don't really think that you can get from stand-up because you're so in your head about what's coming next. Yeah. And you're trying to remember what your next bits are, that you can never really give yourself over to, I'm going to be spontaneous for 5 minutes. Yeah. And someone like yourself, of course, you can, but you're an exception. But even like the people who have written their sets, they can do that. But they're still in the back of their heads. They're like, I've got to get this back on track at some point. This is fun right now.
Yeah.
But
I have a limited amount of time.
I have a limited amount of time to do this before the lights flash, and I have a punchline that I haven't quite gotten to yet. Yeah. So that's the difference there. So lights, whenever I write stand up, everything is sort of in my head. Even the performance of it, I kind of have an idea of how I'm going to move around. I don't need to see people. I imagine where they are, and I look at them in the eyes in the darkness. Right. To the extent that in one of the shows, I was doing this bit, and somebody came up to me afterwards, and we were talking about how dark it was. I was like, "Oh, the lights blinded me." Someone said, "But you kept looking over at me," and I'm like, I give the impression that I'm looking at people, and I move my head like I'm looking at people, but I cannot see a thing. Yeah. But before I was able to do that, I'd like to be able to see people doing stand-up, so I can actually look at them in the eyes. So how do you feel them out then? Because I know in some, like when you have a crowd that's kind of into it, you can just sort of feel it in the room. But again, like I suppose for a crowd I want to win over, it really helps to be able to see if I'm actually doing that. So do you just feel it, or do you just go through the script because you know the script is funny? You've tried it, you've played it, you know it's gonna work. Fuck 'em. It's fuck 'em. Fuck 'em. All of the way, fuck 'em. After my first couple of experiences, my first couple of times doing stand up, I was like, there's something. I am funny enough to get away with doing bad stand up. I'll never be so bad that. Except as like exceptional circumstances where people are like, this guy's just really not very good or on form, or maybe I was just lucky my first couple, but I was able to do it not really having done it before, have some people laugh, enjoyable experience, people thought, well, it was very good, etc., and I thought, okay, I'm at least okay at this. So that meant that I thought, well, as long as I know I'm like basically competent, then I can go into these things going, I have a basic idea of what I think is funny. The audience, some of them will find what I think is funny. It's not trying to like win all of them over. And as long as I get a couple of people laughing along with this, I'm safe. Better than trying to appease everybody. Yes, yeah. So that's what I'm aiming to do with every set. I'm thinking of the person who has the same comic sensibilities as me in the audience. I'm like, this set is all for them, and hopefully one or two of their friends who also have the same sensibility. Yeah. So in that set, it's not so much it's not like, fuck 'em, I don't care what anyone thinks. If no one was laughing, in itself, isn't it? If no one was laughing, I'd be like, okay, now my material is so weird that no one thinks it's amusing. I need to change this up. But if I can get a couple of people laughing, or one person after a show that says, I know everyone else hated it, but I thought it was great. And I'm like, good, that one person is just for you.
Yeah. I definitely had times like that doing the street show. There's jokes I would throw in that I found amusing. And I honestly didn't care if anyone got it. And if one or two people did get it in the show, that would endear them to me. I'd be like, oh, you're my people. You got that weird fucking thing that I threw in there. And for everyone else, it's a throwaway line. It just doesn't register. I think one of them was the Stockholm Syndrome joke. There's a stock line. So a lot of street performers may never end up as comedians because a lot of them don't write their own stuff. They get really, really good at performance, but not good at writing. And then you get, like, the standard is for people who are good at it to move on to comedy eventually. So there's a stock line of when somebody walks through your show, you say, oh, ladies and gentlemen, my future wife or husband. And usually they keep walking. So I used to say, I'll use my natural charm and wit to win him over, and if that doesn't work, Stockholm Syndrome. You ever get like one or two people laugh during the show at that, and I'd be like, those people know. They're my people.
Yeah.
I've used that one on in my stand-up set, and it gets a much bigger laugh in like comedy clubs for sure. I think people in comedy clubs like to think of themselves as educated, and you know, are they generally middle class, do you think, or
in comedy clubs?
Like in comedy, they like to think of themselves.
What sort of comedy clubs? Here we go to the comedy club, darling. Oh, it's comedy tonight.
I better put on the Versace, darling. Just put the Gucci away.
I don't know. I think people see so much comedy, maybe not necessarily live, but people watch a lot of comedy TV shows, and comedy TV shows have so many, they have so many references to things in them that there's an element of, it's almost like there's a Pavlovian response here.
Yeah.
Where you don't get a reference, you understand that it's a reference, and you laugh at the fact that it's a reference.
Oh,
like
that's upsetting.
Like,
that hurts my brain.
That might not necessarily be the case with Stockholm Syndrome, but I've done that in my stand-up. I've realised that if I intone a thing a certain way, then people will laugh even if they don't fully understand what it is. Because it's like a stand-in for
a concept rather than...
Right.
Yeah.
It's
like,
a sign.
I want him, he doesn't want me, I'm gonna do something weird to him. And Stockholm Syndrome is just that stand-in for something weird is going to happen.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
And so people Stockholm Syndrome is like, I think, a common...
Fairly common, yeah.
It's just common in general. The phenomenon is so common.
I have a man in my basement right now.
I've been trying to get out for the past 4 hours.
By the way, we have lost... I knew something was going to go wrong. We've lost visual, but we still are recording, so we're all good.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Anyway, Stockholm Syndrome, that's where we were. So...
You ever had it? I went to Stockholm once. I liked it at first. Or I didn't like it at first. Yeah, that's...
Oh, that's pretty... Now, that's niche. That's the sort of joke that people would have to actually understand the reference to. As opposed to just like a term that someone didn't understand.
I do like that. I don't think I came up with that myself, though. I'm pretty sure I must have heard it somewhere. I think I came up with it, but I think many other people have come up with it also before.
At the same time, while watching the comedy special, we all came up with it at the same time.
100 monkeys watching just for laughs,
yeah, I mean I think that's something that is no, I don't know if it's underutilized, is it? Like that idea that you don't necessarily have to explain things to people, and well, this is the whole other thing about physicality and you know, again, in like clowning, I guess, or mime, or really anything that's very physical, even in improv, is that there are certain types of physical thing that you will do, people will start laughing. Have you ever, I'm trying to remember who the author is. There's a really excellent book on physical comedy and pratfalls.
Okay.
And some of it is on like how to really do a pratfall really well. And you realize when you read a book like that and you watch someone like accidentally trip over themselves, you're like, that was an excellent, that's really funny because of the way their foot kind of like stumbled behind them as they were doing it.
Huge in clowning. Like, I mean, the physicality is like the concept of Harlequin Arlecchino Like, he was a very, very stupid guy. And the character is a very, very stupid character.
Mm-hmm.
But, like, he's so deft physically that, like, he could do a somersault or a backflip or any of this sort of stuff. But yeah, all of those falls, like, I don't know what I used to think before I knew this. I don't know if I saw it and thought, oh, that guy actually fell over, or how it registered.
Mm-hmm.
But now that I know it, I'm definitely looking at the technique. I'm definitely going, wow, that's hard.
Mm-hmm.
That's a really difficult thing to do. And not just to do and not hurt yourself, but to do and make it look like that.
Yeah.
Charlie Chaplin was an absolute master at that. I've watched, I think I've watched everything of his. It's hard to say. I'm sure there's stuff that's lost to time. But I even managed to get hold of his Keystone Pictures stuff, which is not as easily available. That's his earlier stuff. And not all of it was sort of written or directed by him. But I do love Charlie Chaplin. Buster Keaton's another one who's great at the physical comedy.
Yeah, I mean, Keaton's a master.
Yeah, absolutely. I had someone tell me, who was it? Was it Chris Lynham? Have you ever heard of Chris Lynham?
Name rings a bell. He
has a show which he finishes naked with a firework up his arse singing "There's No Business Like Show Business," and I saw him do this in Sligo. And like, everyone was mad into it, but it was also in Sligo, so it was just like, what the fuck is going on here? Like, absolutely lovely bloke. He's a really well respected clown. If you ever get a chance to see his work, it's well worth it. And he was saying to me that, no, it wasn't him, it was another street performer who said that clowns shouldn't be sentimental, and that's why they didn't like Charlie Chaplin. And I was like, that's a weird reason not to like somebody, because you should be able to say, well, they're still intensely skilled even if I don't like the method. But also this idea that clowns shouldn't be sentimental. I've seen so many sentimental clowns, and even in the concept of comedy itself, like, there's a lot of sort of like comedy of lonely people, or comedy of grief, and you know, it can be a healing process as well to laugh about stuff like that.
There's a question in there of how real a performance is before it turns people off watching.
You think too real could turn people off, or when it starts to turn into something that's not real?
Well, I'll give you like this. So this is in my head because I read something recently about whenever Ralph Fiennes was Oscar. He was nominated for the Oscar for Schindler's List, and it was a really highly contended. It was like supporting actor. Like there were like Leonardo DiCaprio was in it, Tommy Lee Jones won it. Pete Postlethwaite for In the Name of the Father was in it, and then Ralph Fiennes. And the argument at the time, because people were like, it's such a like any one of them really could have won it, but people were like, Ralph Fiennes is such an amazing like evil performance, and that movie should have got it. And the idea, when he didn't get it, people were saying he was too evil. People couldn't. Okay, this is a slightly different from where I'm going with this, but he's so evil that people almost don't want to nominate him in case they
encourage it.
They're supporting how evil the person was, and I think
I can see that happening.
Yeah,
I can.
Be
yeah.
like, that was like,
people
he's
are
so
mad.
horrible. I can't possibly vote for that
If he
performance.
thinks it's a good idea,
Yeah.
goes out and starts kidnapping Jewish children. What the fuck?
It's just like rifle shooting people. You're like, oh no, take away his Oscar. Schindler.
Wo bist Schindler?
I once saw, so in improv we have argument scenes. I love an argument. I love a good argument.
Conflict is interesting.
Yeah, it is, and especially when you know the stakes are silly.
Yeah.
When you know it's a silly thing, the more intense the argument, the funnier it is. So, but I have seen people like really act angry, and I'm like, it's very hard to watch someone who looks like they're actually getting angry, because then you're like, is this person actually angry right now? Because now it's not fun anymore if this is a real thing that's happening. I think there's a line where you get very close to making it real, but you still have to maintain an element of theatricality to it so that people feel safe that what they're watching is controlled.
I absolutely love stylized performances. I'm not mad into this hyper-realism that Hollywood seems to be going for. I mean, like, people will look at the 60s and 70s and 80s and go, oh, that was bad acting. And you're like, well, to a degree, if your standard, and some of it was fucking awful, some of it was just terrible acting. But if your standard is hyper-realism, then yes, it's all bad acting. But if your standard is, say, Nicolas Cage, for example, who rarely does anything real when he's doing his characters, it's always like stylized and hyperbole. Like I've always, and I love Wes Anderson for that, because it's really not real, and it's obviously not real, and there's something really fun about that. So yeah, that kind of makes sense that now, and like there are those movies, what is that one, Requiem for a Dream?
Yeah.
It was just grim.
Yeah.
It was so fucking
It's
depressing.
brutal. It's a brutal film. I love it.
Hell.
I mean, I'll never watch it again, but I loved it.
You watch it once and you go, that was amazing. Let's never do that again. And I think like there's a place for that. I don't think every performance has to be that. And yeah, you're right. I think if I were to watch something, particularly on stage, like in a theatre.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because I mean, film is another thing. There's almost like, it depends on how you want to set up your film as to how you're going to be taking people through shots. You're going to be taking people to different places. But on a stage, you're all in the same room, aren't you?
You're watching a TV series or movie and something extremely dramatic happens, or like something that would be upsetting. You're like, it's under control. Like this is it's supposed to be like this to make me feel something. But you're watching a live performance and something upsetting happens. You're like, how under control is this? They haven't been able to like get feedback on this, edit it, change bits up, change the lighting in post-production, and then show it again. I mean, you're watching this live and anything could really happen. I had a friend, I can't give out loads of details on this.
Didn't Tommy, what's his name, that really famous comedian, Tommy Abbott?
No. Oh, yes, who died on stage. Yes, Tommy Cooper.
Tommy Cooper, yes, it was Russ Abbott that kind of did his bit for another 10 years.
Hey!
Rude. Tommy Cooper, yeah, I mean, it's live, anything could happen, and in that case something did, and they thought it was performance, so yeah.
My friend was at a event recently, and this event had a live performance as part of it, and somebody in the middle of one of their performances, somebody looked at a phone in the crowd. And it was a small gathering.
So you had like a little light shine up from the center of the crowd.
Like, I think that it was a well-lit space. So actually, like, he said that when the person did it, he didn't notice until the person started talking to them, and he wasn't very far away from them, and he was like, it was the movement of another performer who just kind of glanced at their phone for some reason and put it back away, and the performer in the middle of their performance said, do you think that this is the type of performance that's appropriate, or something along these lines? And people kind of giggled because they thought it was part of the performance.
Yeah.
But then the person kept going and looked like they were getting visibly upset. And he said that his experience in the audience was, is this real or not right now? Because it seems like such a big deal that it couldn't possibly be real.
Yeah.
Because a lot of the people here are all performers, and this person knows that, and they wouldn't say something like this. At the same time, like, it was so, like, you could start to feel the levels of discomfort in the room. People are sort of moving, going, he's not really annoyed at that, so that's very inappropriate. And at the end of the session, someone said, no, I think that was an actual outburst. Like, he just really, he was really angry that the person had done this and disrupted the performance, and then went back into the regular performance. Anyway, so he was telling me this, and I just thought about what I would do in a similar circumstance, but also that level of discomfort when you're like, has the performer lost control?
Yes, yeah. But also, so when you say what you would do you mean as the audience member or as the performer?
Oh, as either.
Yeah.
As either the audience member of or the performer. And if as an audience member I looked at my phone in a non-disruptive way, which I usually don't do, but occasionally you kind of have a sneaky glance, because maybe you're expecting a freaking important call. You never know what's going on in people's lives. But if a performer went out of their way to do it, I would have been like, That's me told. If they had continued doing it, but I'm a performer, so I would have been like, all right, you're gonna do this. If you are gonna do this, I'm gonna come back.
Yeah.
I'm gonna.
There's
say
two
something.
people in this conversation.
Yeah. I'm gonna stand up, and I'm gonna make a big deal about walking out silently.
Yeah.
If this is the way you want
very,
to play,
I'm
gonna
slowly
increase the awkwardness, which very slowly, without making it look like I'm engaging in this, or I'm just gonna throw something on the stage. As a performer, I mean, I don't know what I would do, but I don't think I would say anything unless it was a continual series of infringements.
Yeah.
And even then, if this was like a scripted performance the person was doing, so it was a one-person show. It was a scripted performance, and if I was doing a one-person show scripted performance that wasn't a comedy where I could like branch off and that might be funny and then come back to what I was doing, if it was dramatic, and I think this piece was, I wouldn't interrupt it. I would be like, what I'm doing is so important right now, and most people are watching me, that to like break it is gonna like
if it hasn't disrupted, you have no reason
if it's
there was a case. I was in a show, I'm so bad, like, this is amazing. If I don't do things regularly, like, they just leave my head. There's Harvey the Rabbit, this imaginary rabbit. It was a movie in the 1950s, and I was playing Vida Louise Simmons. And at one point, so whoever was in the audience, they'd obviously been having a few drinks, and I think they brought in a bottle of wine with themselves or something. And earlier on in the show, I had told the doctor that this place was falling apart. And then we heard a bottle roll, because it was a really silent scene. The bottle dropped, it rolled, and then it fell down a bunch of steps. And like, everyone was distracted about it, and you couldn't not be distracted by it. So I just said, this place has fallen apart.
Yeah.
And the whole audience absolutely erupted, and then we got back to the scene. And I've seen that happen as well. There's a violinist in an orchestra, somebody's phone goes off, and it's and they played it on the violin. So like, it interrupted the entire process, and he brought it back. And I think that's your point as a performer, is not to be berating people in the fucking audience, but to like bring everyone back to the same place again.
Have you seen the clip of an orchestra playing, and like they finished the first interlude or whatever, and it's silence, like it's not even for clapping, it's silence, and you just hear one kid in the audience go, "Wow!" And
so
everyone just erupts. And you can't imagine not smiling.
Yeah.
It's just like, what a beautiful...
Imagine one orchestra member gets up and says, "What the fuck is wrong with you, small child?"
Be fucking quiet.
Yeah.
Get that guy out of here. David Rosowski, as a famous improviser, has this story which I was in a workshop that he did years ago, and he told this story about being in the moment. And long story short of it is, he was in this theater in, I guess, Los Angeles, huge theater. He's whether he was there, like, he was there by himself, so I guess whatever the person he was with wasn't able to be there, and he's just sitting. He's in the upper deck of this huge theater, watching this show, and he's an improviser, and he is watching this, and in the middle of the show, one of the performers says something along the lines of, "I need a prompt," as part of the fucking act. And he says, "That's fine." And then, again, "A prompt, I need a prompt." And he starts to twitch. He's like, we have to give a prompt. Nobody says anything, of course. He says it a third time, and Rosowski just is like, he wants me to shout out a suggestion, like an improv show. And I can't remember what word he shouts out something at him. The only sound in the theater. I don't know, like a submarine or something. I don't know what the word is. Probably not submarine. But and then the actor was like, "For if there are no prompts, how am I?" And just continues on with the thing, and Rosowski just sits there. Getting smaller and smaller and
there was a prompt.
There was no, and I can't remember the exact sentence the performer says. It's something that could easily be interpreted as, but at the same time, once you realise, like, no, that was clearly them just gesturing into the audience. And his whole thing is about that he had to sit there, and his mind was going, observe the moment. You've done this, and now you have to deal with the consequences of that action. Feel the eyes of everybody. And
feel the shame rising up through your body.
What is that they're experiencing? Be in that moment.
Yeah. How does that feel inside?
I know. I would just start twitching in this. But yeah, like even in that example, do someone then shout out, "Hey, but we don't need that." But it's happened. Do you make light of it? It depends on the nature, the experience of the performers, the type of the venue, the type of the show, the type of the interruption, all of these types of things. There are certain types of interruption that you don't want to let go, or sometimes you don't want to acknowledge because it might encourage further things.
You can't give someone the stage if they really want the stage, because it's what like we were saying earlier. If someone really wants it, they're probably not the people you want there. You get that. That's something you have to learn on the street as well, because there's a lot of alcoholics. There's a lot of people with drug addiction, and some of them just want to start. Like, I don't know if you could get into your whole sort of psychoanalysis side of it and say, oh, they're not getting enough attention in their life because of who they're perceived as by society, and so they interrupt these things in order to get some form of attention. But yeah, you kind of have to. I found if you give them a job and you make them part of it, but not in any way that they're actually part of it, you just go, oh, hey, you see that little space there that's opening up? You need to guard that. You need to make sure that nobody gets through there. And then they can stand beside you like a bodyguard for the entire show. Like, and you just sort of mention them every once in a while and they're absolutely delighted. Like, you know.
That's mostly for street performance, not for...
Yeah. Like, you just stand there.
Just stand there, don't let anyone get onto the stage. Yeah. I'm going over my 7.
If anyone interrupt my act, just punch him. But yeah, with theatre, I suppose there is more, what's the word? Like, there's more expectations from people in a theatre. People go to a theatre and they know what's expected of them most of the time. I find with stand-up, there are people who don't understand that you don't go there just to shout it at the performers. Like, oh, that's what you do. That happened in the Chicken Box, actually. This girl was shouting at like pretty much all of the performers, and her friend was going, shut up, no, stop. She was going, that's what you do at a comedy gig. And her friend was like, no, it's not. It's not what you do.
No one else is doing it.
You're the only person here interrupting people's sets. But but I do love a heckler though. I like people who are sort of good intentioned hecklers. I love good intentioned hecklers because you can knock a bit of crack out of them, no problem. Sometimes bad intentioned hecklers, it depends on what they say, how aggressive they are, and like you say, there's some people you just clock and go, do not engage, do not talk to that person at all. But for the most part, it kind of keeps you on your feet, I think, a little bit.
Yeah, those are like interesting perspectives on it. In my experience, my second ever stand-up show, 7 minutes, 7 or 10 minutes, and I was in the same. It was the week after the first time I'd ever done it. It went very well the first time. It was the same set. It was exactly the same type of performance. It not changed. It was in the same venue at the same time, and it was just a different crowd. And it was in the black box. In the small room in the black box. So it's a crowd it's a theatre-ish crowd, entertainment crowd. In the opening, after my opening line, a person in the first or second row made a comment, like almost answering something that I had said, and everyone laughed. And because my thing, I was just beginning, so I hadn't built in places to improvise if I needed to. But that's when I started to do that. I didn't have a way to respond without breaking the entire structure of the set because of how I was leaping from one slick thing to another. Yeah. Almost like you talk rule of 3. If someone breaks up your rule of 3 after the second one before you get to the third one, you're like, that was my punchline. My impact. I'm not even going to bother saying the third thing now because it's freaking ruined. But I had to go into autopilot for the rest of the set. It was fine, but it would definitely... Like, especially if everyone laughs at them, you're in trouble. Yeah. And they're getting confident. Now, this person afterwards was apparently someone who is the director of some like arts charity or something like that there, like, who has never apparently ever been to a comedy show either.
Wow.
And had just like,
was he roughing it with the unwashed?
she was definitely, and because the person who told me about it was like, you'll never guess who that is that said that at the very start of your. It wasn't. I mean, they weren't intending. They just thought it'd be funny if they said something, and they're like, I don't think they go to shows. I don't think they understand. They also think that it's supposed to be abrasive. Everyone's shouting, and they found a thing, and they thought, I'm gonna say this. Right. Because that's what everyone does.
And was it abrasive? Was it sort of a bit rude or a bit sort of aggressive?
No, yes it was. I can't remember exactly what the line was. It was something like, I think I started off my set saying something like, I'm having trouble dating at the moment. And that kind of, that is, again, everything is purposeful. It leads, and there's a callback to it later. There's a whole thing about it. But I say it as like a, just a statement that I almost immediately go into a second statement, but I just didn't at this point. And it was like, I'm having trouble dating at the moment. Oh, it was something like that, but not real. Oh, more like, oh, look at you. And it was that got the big laugh. And I was just like, I don't care about any of you. You should all know better. So that, I wasn't devastating because luckily I'd already done the set before and got a good response. So I knew, and I was just unlucky. But actually, although I would say, I hate hecklers, because of the nature of that heckle, I was like, I'm going to have to build in all of my sets here, like the flexibility where if somebody says something early on or I have to go on a digression, I can find a way to pull it back. So my things are like very highly structured, but they have to be structured in a way which allows, you build in flexibility.
Yeah. Well, I think you find with street shows, because like I was doing 4 shows a day for the first year. I did like 4 shows a day, and I worked in the summer every day, and in the winter I would work Friday to Sunday. And you find that responses are quite typical. You'll get one of maybe 4 responses. So what I ended up doing was having 4 different answers. And then you're rarely caught off guard, because like you would say something and then one of 4 different type of people would have their typical response. One of the responses is absolutely no response, and then you can just continue with whatever structure you were going with. But it was like that thing about the children that would always shout out, "Don't die." That would happen nearly every single show.
Oh,
yeah.
No.
So like whenever I would talk about getting up on this stack and I was going to juggle machetes up here, really dangerous, and just balancing on my tippy toes, some kid would inevitably shout out, "Don't die." So I worked it into the show. I used to actually tell the children that death comes to us all.
Oh no, especially you.
Yeah. Look up at their dad or something. Like, you're not looking so good. But people have a very dark sense of humor. It's amazing what you can get away with. But yeah, when you're doing walk-by stuff and you're sort of throwing things out, you'll get different types of responses. And there's a guy, Anthony Livingspace, incredible performer. I wonder, is he doing Edinburgh this year? He usually does. And he's what they call a walk-by street performer. So there's different types of street shows. And the walk-by, they allow people to walk through their show, and they make that part of the show. And sometimes they elicit a response, and you think it's absolute genius, because you're like, how can he possibly know how people are going to react? It's because he's done it so many times in so many different ways that he just knows that they're going to do one of 4 things, and he's going to respond in one of 4 ways. And that I found really handy for stand-up as well. That I'm like, they're going to give me a boring response, an interesting response, or it's going to be so out there I won't know what to do with it. And that's rare. Like, it's rare that you get someone who's that bloody witty, if we're honest. And I do like that about the heckling, is it's usually quite predictable. The sort of stuff that people do shout at. Yeah, that's probably very much a thing you pick up on the street, and probably only if you do as many shows as I had done at that point. And that's one thing I found about stand-up is, like you were saying earlier, you only get 5 minutes, and you only get so many gigs, and then you have to drive or walk or take a bus to the gig, and that's like, several hours that you only got 5 minutes for, and then so I don't think you're learning at the same rate you would learn in a lot of other stuff. Like I think, I don't know, do you get hecklers in improv? Is that something that happens? Because they're kind of engaged already. You're asking them for...
Yeah, but you're not really. You are, but it's not really that interactive, and usually it's just like one word at the very start. So a lot of it is just watching a show, you know. And most people don't say anything, you know. It's usually the same 5 or 6 people who will shout things. And you're just like, what is the most inventive thing that someone's gonna shout? Hecklers, no. We won't broach them. Like it's not that type of show. And if somebody like says something in the middle of a show, then they're like, if I'm in the show, I will be like, I'm gonna keep going, and if somebody else says something, I'm just gonna like pause the scene and I'm gonna go over and I'm gonna be like, you need to. I'll deal with it in the moment. I'll find a way to like deal with it. But I would, if I thought someone was really trying to ruin a show, I would be very happy to just like even stop and just have a chat about what's going on. Like and which seems awkward, but at the same time, you want everyone in a room especially who are like probably going like, oh my god, this is awkward for everyone, to say, oh, like the performers have this under control. Actually, this isn't awkward. They know how to deal with this, and they're making it not awkward, even though it's a kind of weird situation. Like, you want to show a level of, like, I think if you're managing a night, show the level of like, oh, this happens all the time and this is how we deal with it, and we just move on. As opposed to, oh my god, should we say something to that person? Because now everyone's getting more and more awkward because they're worried that it's not going to be dealt with correctly.
You'd think you'd get more of it on the street, but it is quite rare that people come and try and intentionally ruin your show.
Oh yeah. I don't think anyone really, like, few and far between are the people who want to do that. Yeah, most people just, it's what they think that you have to do. Plus, there's whatever, like, thousands of videos online of comedian destroys heckler, and people are like, oh, heckling's a thing, and it's a popular thing and everyone loves it, and you just
I want to get destroyed.
I'd love to be destroyed by Jimmy Carr.
Oh god. He'll just call you fat.
Just don't mention his taxes. So I think people just want to get in on the crack. Sometimes, I mean, I've watched some stand-up where I have thought, I hope someone heckles this show. I mean, like, I love performers and I love their performances, but that there are also performers who are so bad and by being bad's one thing, not even trying to get better, not paying attention. Earlier I said, we both said, fuck the audience, but that's not really true. Like what that is for what I'm doing, whether it's improv or stand-up, what I'm doing is I want everyone to enjoy it, but I'm trying to do a type of comedy that I think, in order for to be successful, I can't be thinking what will appeal to everyone, because if I could do that, I would. But I can't. I can only do what I think appeals. And
maybe someone would discover you because you'd be so
because it'd be
good.
like, God, that guy, that's Peter Kay. Everyone appeals to literally everybody. Like, but until we find that, you're like, you can only do what you sort of think is funny, what other people think is funny, based on your comedic sensibility. So I want everyone to enjoy it. I hate to think that someone's come out of a show thinking, I didn't really like that bit, or that wasn't very funny, because I want them to have a good time. Unless they're a horrible fascist, which case I hope they have a terrible time. He's just talking about fucking progressive issues the whole time. But I want everyone to have a good time, but there are
I'm going to become that fascist just because I don't think there's enough fascist representation anymore.
Someone's got to do it. But I've watched performers who and I think it's well known in the performing community, there are people who have been in the circuit that aren't in it anymore, that everyone kind of rounded on, or like, this person's just making it everyone hates them, they're not a fun performer to be around, their comedy isn't any good, and they're almost trying to be controversial, and they're trying to take the hand out of the audience in a
there's
way
no
which
nuance
actually,
to what they're saying.
Absolutely. It leaves everyone with a bad taste in their mouth. So you get performers like that who, not that they're terrible at it, they just, it's like, I don't know what I'm actually trying to say, they're not in it for the fun reasons everyone else is in it for.
I think there's social status that comes with being a performer. Not necessarily among other performers.
Certainly not any money.
No,
definitely
no money.
Social status.
You do get some kind of social status. Certainly on the night you would. Because the audience is going to go, oh, you're one of those guys, you know, like, even those people who go, oh, I would never do that myself, and there's a sort of level of respect that comes with it. And sometimes there's just people thinking you're just a filthy comic or you're just a filthy street. You'll get those kind of people. But I do see people go into it for the social status of it. Because, as you say, it's sure as hell not the money. You know? Yeah, I think those are kind of often the worst performers. If they're only in it because they want that guy to like them, or they want this group of people to like them, or, you know, and it's not about making those people laugh, it's about those people liking them and elevating them and thinking that they're whatever type of person. Right. Like, I can only do stuff that I think is fun and interesting. I think my brain is broken. I've tried to do stuff for the necessity, and I can't fucking do it. I can't hold a job for that reason. I have to have something interesting going on. So if I didn't enjoy comedy, I wouldn't do it. But I've seen people not enjoy performance and still go in and do it because they get something out of it that has nothing to do with performance.
Absolutely. There's people who are just...
You getting that list out, are you?
What? There's only one name on it.
Dad.
Told you not, Dad, this is my thing. So literally dad jokes. So yeah, you occasionally... where would this come from? Oh, the heckler thing. Occasionally you get a performer who is, they really don't care about the audience. Like, they really don't.
Right.
They just care about, like, this is filling some sort of need that they have.
Sort of narcissistic, attention-grabbing.
Exactly what it is. And you can tell the minute they start talking is that they are more concerned with the sound of their own voice than that's a tool they're using to convey something to the audience that the audience will find entertaining. So it's not about it's not a performance tool. It's this is what I'm like, and I'm incredibly narcissistic. I watched one of those shows not very long ago. I was like, I wish someone would heckle this bit, because even the bit itself I didn't like. I was like, I don't like the tone or the vibe of what they're saying. And I wish somebody would just say something. It actually happened on one of the newcomers nights. Somebody did like a very off-color piece, and I talked to some comedians after the night, and somebody said, I was just waiting for somebody to stand up and say, you can't say that, because I think everyone would have been in agreement. And it's one of those things where your politeness, you're like, oh, it's a new person, but also if they say something that is extremely problematic, where do you... I know people who absolutely love shock value, and they think that in itself is funny, and it's not. I don't like it. I mean, like, if you're a very funny person, you can make very crude and shocking things sound funny, but crude and shocking itself is not funny in of itself, I don't think. But I also think there's a sort of, like, you have to have a bit of room for people like that as well, because we can't police what people are going to say on stage, because then it's not a safe space anymore, and like the audience will let them know. I mean, if the first audience doesn't, because friendly audiences can give people a false sense of security. They can go, oh, they laughed, I'm funny, and it's like sometimes they laughed because they're in a comedy space and they were just being polite. But I think that those people, if they don't actually get the skills for performance, they tend to fade out after a certain number of gigs, because they're not going to get what they need out of it. And I don't like, I'm one of these people who kind of believes in free speech to a degree, and there's stuff my mates say that is just horrendous. But I know they're saying it because they think it's funny. I know sometimes they're saying it because it will get a reaction, and if you don't give them a reaction, then it takes the power out of what they're doing. And that reaction could be a bad reaction as well. And I think sometimes people can kind of go overboard and saying this comedian isn't allowed to say this because it's horrendous. And you're like, well, no one was reacting. If you had said nothing, he wouldn't have got any reaction, and he'd probably never have used that bit again. Now, I'm not saying that was happening in that specific event. No, of course not.
But, you know, most people can tell when the audience is deeply uncomfortable. You should be able to.
That is not the case. That is not the case. There are.
Just keep going.
There
Just
definitely. I've been in that
keep
situation.
going.
I've seen it a lot where people
Oh.
are like, "You do not realize
Yeah.
you think this is funny awkwardness? This is just like really
Yeah.
you're losing the audience awkwardness." Why is performance important to me? What was the question?
Sure. Or the
or
world.
answer whatever question you want.
Why do
in
you
your
think
head.
it's important to
What's
me?
your
Why is it important to your mum?
It's not. Actually, my parents, they've seen, at least they saw my first hour-long stand-up show, and they watched a lot of my improv shows. They love it.
Oh,
Like, they love
that's
improv.
nice.
It's also because improv here is very, very high quality.
Yeah.
So it's not like the TV and movie improv you see. So they love it. It's high quality, good crack. But why is improv? Sorry, why is performance improv? In case anyone is nowhere, you can find out more about me on improv.com. Why is performance important to me? I don't know that, first of all, that it is the most important thing. It isn't something that I would never give up. Not to say that it's so sacred that I totally need it in my life. There are things in my life that are important to me. There are things that I want to achieve in the world, and what's the word I'm trying to look for? I want to see like certain values of mine realized in the world. I want to be able to do certain types of things in the world that are not necessarily related to performance, and if given the opportunity to do that, maybe I would do that. So performance for me isn't something where I would say I must always be doing it for as long as I can because I get something out of it.
Yeah.
So I just want to be like absolutely clear on that, because that's not the same for all performers. Because some performers, it's
their life.
They must do it.
They breathe it. They eat it, sleep it. Yeah.
So that being said, I love it. I love performing, and I especially love it, and I think I wake up, and maybe this is common among all performers, but I wake up on the night of a performance. I wake up in the morning of a performance. Wake up after
5 minutes before I'd have to be there. I wake up.
I wake up in the morning of a performance or the morning after a performance, just feeling absolutely joyful. I mean, assuming that it goes up, they usually are okay. Being like, God, isn't it I should be somehow grateful that I've been given the opportunity to be on stage pretending something or saying funny lines, entertaining other people in like a really pure, especially with improv, in like a really pure way, where you're not necessarily trying to be controversial, but like it's just like something funny in the movement and like the concepts. And you're entertaining a large group of people who are getting a lot out of it. And
this is one of my favorite types of comedy, is just the silly comedy.
Yeah.
It's quite hard to do.
To be purely silly.
Yeah, I think if you sort of do lean on the sort of controversial topics, you've already got a bit of a foothold there, haven't you? Because people have opinions.
Yeah, it can be easier, although there's also risk attached.
Yeah.
But like being like purely silly is very difficult. I mean, there's some comedians that stand out as being like Russ Noble, who are just like very, very good at just being able to it's something.
It's a silly man.
But performance is important to me for that. It gives me access to something that I never really knew I needed. But then when I started doing it, I was like, oh, this has been a part of me that I've never always been a part of me. Like, it's a part of all performances, a part of all people. That's been part of me, and I've never been able to like actualize that. I never even knew it was something I was missing until I did it, and then I realized that I should have been doing this all my life.
Did some like bad habits disappear after you started? Where you kind of like, it resolved some issues,
Oh, absolutely.
In that sense.
And stand-up isn't therapy, and neither is improv.
Some people think it is.
Especially not therapy. And those people should go to therapy. And then also do improv. But is there stuff that like I realized things about myself probably after I started performing on stage. So having to like stand in front of a large group of people and even just talk to them, let alone MC or whatever, let alone entertain, and have honest conversations with people in large public arenas is it changes, I think, a little. It changes the way you think about people and yourself. And I overused the word mindset, and I used to hate the word mindset. But like how you think about the world and how you think about yourself and like the relationships you have with other people and the world do change when you're in the like sort of public arena.
Yeah.
So, or even like the comedy arena, that changes how you. At least if you're doing it properly. If you're not, like if you're doing it and I haven't changed a thing, I have not. There's no introspection or reflection here whatsoever. Yeah. I think if you're doing it correctly, you should definitely have like you look at certain ways of being and be like, oh yeah, I guess I should. Like I wouldn't have been like this if I had something an outlet such as this. But the key thing for why performance is so important to me is it allows me to access that. But the type of performance that I do also engenders bringing other people into that. So unlike, I think, any of the other performing arts, I think improv is always trying to get more people to join it because of it feels more special when more people are involved. So if you're, not that it doesn't happen nowadays, but if you're like a street performer, you're not thinking, I've got to get all of my friends to be street performers.
No.
If you're stand-up, you're like, I hope none of my friends become stand-ups. I want to be the only good one.
So I don't want to share the fucking pitch. Those are my hats. That's my fucking money.
When you're doing improv, whenever I started, I was like, oh my god, all of the people, this is so accessible. And I see how people naturally do this, but with a little bit of structure and some performance techniques, they can make this really entertaining for other people and get a lot out of it.
Yeah.
Because of that, there isn't that barrier. You start seeing people around you who can do it. You're like, these people need to do it. Like it'll transform them and also me because we'll be doing this together.
Yeah.
Because they'll be a scene partner of mine someday. You want maybe if street performing like you, and I'm sure you do it with other people, of course. But if you were reliant on other people to do this, you'd be like, I need all of my friends to be doing it.
Yeah.
So that's why that, kind of avoiding the question a little bit, or maybe just going a little bit around it, but like the performance is important to me because, certainly with improv, it's the type of performance that brings other people along with you. And if I couldn't perform anymore, I would just be happy knowing that other people were getting to experience that feeling of like working really closely with others, making other people laugh. It's an incredibly satisfying.
Yeah. It's very wholesome as well, isn't it, to choose to make people laugh?
It is. Yeah. I think it is. I think even if you're one of the controversial comics, is it something
you're
like
probably not one of the bad ones, or maybe
you're like there's not. You're likely not one of the ones that we all hate. You're probably one of the ones that we like, and you're doing this because you enjoy people laughing in a room. So good for you.
Yeah. I think we can leave that there. I think that was really good. All right. Thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoyed that. If you want to support the podcast so that I can get more interesting people here to sit down with me, or get myself to more interesting people, whichever makes more sense, then you can go to patreon.com/Renegade Context. There's also extras for patrons only. I have cut down each episode to keep it within a listenable level, but also on topic. So if we vary or wander from the main topic too much, I have cut that out of the podcast and added it to Patreon as an extra. Hopefully each episode will have this, but it will very much depend on how much time I have to do editing and whatnot, and how long the conversations are. So that comes down to how much time other people have as well. So thank you very much for listening, and I'll see you at the next one. If you have any comments, please work away. I love a good conversation.